Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Finding Freedom. Now, what we're going to talk about in this is how to speak after a lesson. If you haven't caught class, which talks about creativity, logic, art, science, and spirituality, and how they all kind of come together. I had a couple students of mine, one that showing a lot of promise. He has a lot of potential to do great things. However, he wants to share everything with his friends. And so, with that being said, I wanted to make sure that he understood that the things that I was trying to point out to him versus everybody else that don't understand is that, well, what was taught to him was specifically for him. Now, when other people try to use it and things like that, right? It's kind of like a magic trick, right? I remember my cousin Noah, when he was a kid, he wanted to learn magic and everything, and I knew he wasn't ready yet. And it's one of those things where people will learn a couple things. I showed a friend of mine 3-card money, and then next thing you know, he's hustling people on the street for money and things like that, doing 3-card money. Not that there's anything wrong with it. However, it was meant for entertainment purposes, not to swindle people out of money. Now, this is the same kind of ideology that I need to instill upon this student. And so I wanted to, tap on a couple things by telling you, well, some of my experiences with my friends back in the day, so on and so forth. Now, in high school, I went to a school called J.M. Robinson High School, and I used to do this thing called the trust test with certain people, right? In Catholic school, they play the game telephone. Well, I took that a step further, and I would tell somebody something, and I would see how long it would take for it to come back to me. And if it didn't come back to me, and nobody heard of it, so on and so forth, etc., and, whispered trying to say, hey, how do you like them apples, whatever the case may be, then I knew either somebody had a big freaking mouth, or they were not allowed to be inside of the circle, right? So I remember my boy Lester, he passed. However, this kid I knew named Derek, who actually will lead into my story with Lance, he came out, he goes, oh, Mike, I heard this, that, and the third, and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, who told you that? Oh, well, so on and so forth said this. And if he told you that and you're supposed to be in the circle, isn't your mouth supposed to be shut about it? And he's like, oh, well, I just wanted to know, blah, 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 this, that, and the third. I just thought this. And I was like, you know what? Never mind. You're out. You're done. You will never get anything from me ever again. Needless to say, moving forward, he ended up letting his bike or lending his motorcycle to my buddy Lance, who wasn't that experienced, was probably intoxicated, and he ended up crashing and getting brain damage. Well, after Lance went through his recovery process, and granted, I used to treat Lance like a little brother. His brother TJ could tell you this. We had a fight club and everything. I taught him how to fight, so on and so forth. He was in shape. His mother loved me. I remember he literally, after one workout session, his mother goes to me. She goes, my son has ADHD and he has not moved or spoke since he's left your house or all day today. What did you do to him? I said, oh, I just had him work out with me for a little bit. I've been teaching him how to fight. She goes, keep doing that. It's working. She goes, I like you. And I was like, okay, no problem. But as time went on, he started, falling down the beaten path, and everybody experiments with things, but they get addicted to certain things. Now, I'm no hypocrite because I've done certain things, right? Now, here's the thing. After a while, you start pushing an envelope. And when that envelope gets pushed too far, you start thinking that you know everything. Once you start thinking that you know everything, there's going to be an issue. And so, I heard stories of, Lance getting a little bit too cocky as he got older. And, he recently got in trouble. It is what it is. He got caught carrying a concealed weapon, this, that, and the third. He ended up, going to jail and all this other stuff. Anyways, I digress. But, I try to trust people. But when they cross me, I try to give them a chance. But if they cross me again, it's going to be an issue, right? And so after giving people chances and chances and chances, I remember this movie with Kathy Bates. And I've gotten to this point with certain individuals. And there's this movie called A Family That Prays that was by Tyler Perry. And in there, Kathy Bates is, orchestrated. She owns a construction company, if I remember correctly. And she's, trying to conduct a deal and a negotiation. And she literally looks at one of the gentlemen. He was a little sketchy, so on and so forth. I think he crossed, some lines over and over again, similar to stories of before, like Derek and Lance. Thought it was cool to share it with everybody, so on and so forth, etc. And Kathy Bates says, look, I'm going to do this, but if you cross me, I will nail your ass to the wall. Just like that, in front of everybody in the conference, in front of everybody in the room, so on and so forth, etc. And I always liked that line. I also like Kathy Bates because she reminded me of my Aunt Grace. You could literally commit murder, and if you went to my Aunt Grace, she more than likely would get you out of it, depending if she liked you or not, so on and so forth, etc. But, it was one of those things where you could almost do no wrong as long as you were honest, trustworthy, and truthful about it. But if you wanted to be sneaky, sly, so on and so forth, etc., pretend to be the nice guy and then BS your way, so on and so forth, pretending to be friends to develop rapport, be like, oh, he trusts you. Say this to him. Do this magic trick. Hey, you look like this. So on and so forth, and I've seen that before with my buddy Justin Willman, who has a Netflix TV show, right? I've told you before in previous videos, I've been a magician for more than 20 years now. And my main areas were pretty much close-up and mentalism, but then I started to get into the history of a lot of it, along with other things. Now, granted, I wanted to take that as a grain of salt. When you guys are learning stuff from class, it's not to say, oh, well, you can't say this or that. Use your own creativity. If you remember the movie Good Will Hunting, there was Ben Affleck in the movie, and he was trying to pick up this girl in the bar, so on and so forth. And this cocky, arrogant blonde comes over, and he starts quoting all these things from books and blah, blah, blah. Now, granted, Ben Affleck's character was BSing, etc. But then Matt Damon had to step in, who actually studied, who actually read books. But he literally paused them. He goes, oh, you got that from chapter 27, right? Or you got that from this. Oh, you read this book, etc., right? You read Leviticus, whatever the case may be, right? Okay, why don't you do something that's more original instead of just quoting other people's work, so on and so forth, right? One day life is going to hit you and they're going to question you, and you're not going to have technology or other things. You're going to have to rely on your brain, right? You're going to have to rely on, well, in class, creativity, combine that with logic so that it can make sense later, right? And, it's one of those things that I hope my students understand, and, this particular student understands as well. Granted, he may be older than me, younger than me. It really doesn't matter because, let's put it like this. If you think age dictates level of maturity, then you must also think that a degree dictates your level of intelligence. And if you said yes to both of those, you must think everybody with a driver's license can drive as well. So let's move forward. Now, when I was growing up, yes, I went to Catholic school and I got to experience and hang around the public school kids, so on and so forth in New York City. I got the best of both worlds, as I say. I used to hang out at PS5. I used to go to 165, etc. and travel. I used to use my student Metro card because it was, if you were a student, you got a Metro card, you got a limited number of free rides on transit. So I used to travel all over the place, hang out with different groups of people, etc. And one of the things we learn is wordplay. And I remember going to the Billy Graham Museum with my mother. And I don't know if you heard this story before, but when we were at the Billy Graham Museum, there's actually an area where it looks like graffiti, but it says people on the wall, right? And I said, hey, Mom, check this out. I said, you remember wordplay? I said, look, the Pope, right? Because all these letters are in there. The Pope, P-O-P-E, is supposed to look after the people that believe in L. And she goes, how did you figure that out? And I was like, oh, that's wordplay from school and everything like that. And, these are the creative things that people don't see. If you remember, if you have seen class, how to hear with your eyes, right? And then see with your ears, so on and so forth. Shift your perspective and your perceptions of the world and ask more questions. Remember, over time, people's minds get calcified and they don't want to learn anything else anymore, or they could critique something, so on and so forth. And that's perfectly fine. But if you're not adding your own spice, your own creativity on top of what you learned, then all you're doing is plagiarizing like the blonde dude that went to Harvard in Good Will Hunting. And then you're going to have somebody like Matt Damon show up, get in your face and be like, well, what else you got for me? Right? So, one of the things that you want to do when you're in class, and let's get into this, right? Because how do you speak after a lesson dictates exactly what you retained. Remember, Albert Einstein, or Einstein, depending on how you want to pronunciate or enunciate his name, said that college or school does not test your level of intelligence. It tests your memory. It does not test your creativity. It tests your memory. right? Now, it's great to remember something and imitate it. Yes, emulation is the greatest form of flattery. But what's even better is when you can take what you learn and then combine it with your stuff and make something better. Think about this. For those of you who have children out there, right? You can't make children yourself, right? But if you had a fraternal twin that was a female, incest, whatever, royalty does this, so on and so forth, etc. At least back in the day. I don't know if they still do it now. But you would literally get the same thing to come out, right? Same genes, so on and so forth, etc. It's not unique. It's not different. It's not going to act differently. The behaviors are going to, so on and so forth, right? If you're from the same area, let's say the Carolinas, well, they're going to have the same mindset, so on and so forth. If you travel to New York and you get married with somebody up there, or Florida, or let's say, God forbid, you leave the country and experience other cultures, you could find someone in Brazil or Colombia or India or Asia or Russia or wherever the case you want to go, right? Or Belarus, or where else? What's another one? Oh, Romania, right? So on and so forth, right? And it's all different cultures and things like that. And then, of course, if you do have children with these people, the child is going to have experiences of both worlds, whether that's being from Romania, America, UK, Europe, whatever the case may be. If you're crazy enough, maybe Germany, so on and so forth, etc. I'm not poking any holes or fun at people, but let's just say Germany's history is not the best. I don't know if you guys remember the Nazis, but it's one of those things. So, not to say everyone from there is like that. I'm just saying things normally tend to die hard. Anyways, moving forward. So if you're going to use what's known as subterfuge or manipulation and deceit in order to gain the good graces of somebody, right? In order to gain more knowledge, right? Because knowledge is, well, secrets that are not obtained yet, right? If you didn't know 2 + 2 = 4, well, then it's a secret that 2 + 2 = 4, right? Or if 1 + 1 = 2, right? Or if 1 + 1 = 3, right? Because if a parent and another, or I should say a adult and another adult have a child, now there's 3, right? Or 3, then you would understand where all of it's coming from. But if you do not, then don't pretend or act as such. People would say stuff to me, and I would hear things, and they would be very sarcastic. Oh, love is hard, or I know what you're up to, or you're fake ass, blah, 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 blah. Whatever, keep going. If you remember my other lesson, when it comes to you cannot fight with a dull weapon, there's a section in there where I say just stand there and take it. Normally with people and humans in general and species alike, their curiosity will normally lead them to their own destruction. And this is a technique from, well, ninjutsu. If you watch, I think it was called Fight Science on Discovery Channel, there's a gentleman in there that studied ninjutsu, whatever you want to call it. And he talks about come with me on your own destruction, so on and so forth, etc. Right? And I've always studied martial arts, and I've mentioned this before. And that's what happens when you start to copy things. And because it's not original and it's not you, whether that's because you're scared that people might judge you, right? Or you maybe don't want to upset people, so on and so forth, because you might lose money, or God forbid, people might run away. Good, it leaves room for other people. Screw them, okay? Because you don't want those people. If you're running a business, right? Apple, for instance, right? They didn't care if they lost customers when they jumped from the wired headphones to Bluetooth. If people wanted to leave, so on and so forth, they could. If they wanted to adapt and overcome, they could. If they wanted to buy an extension to keep the wire, so on and so forth, they could. However, they had a choice to express their free will, right? And if you want other people around you, better people that will give off the same energy that you give off, right? Then you're going to have to not only adapt and overcome, but you're going to have to accept yourself for whom you are, right? It's one thing to be original, and it's another thing to be an imitator, right? Imitation, yes, is one thing. This is why it's dangerous to plagiarize when you're going to college or university. Let's say you're coding and you steal someone's code. I had this conversation with somebody in the car, and they were talking about how they now use AI to cheat and code and stuff like that. I said, you didn't realize that AI actually smart enough to put something in there to let anybody who checks the code know that, it was written by AI? Like, and then, then they started to get there's something in martial arts called black belt fever. And so everybody likes to test the boundaries and, push a little more, whatever. Same thing happens in the military. Eventually people end up dropping blouse, but that's a whole different terminology that most people don't understand. It's like saying the word brass tacks, right? When you say the word brass tacks, what are you actually referring to, right? Because, if you're referring to violence, well, last time I checked, you can't use brass if there's a shortage on supply of it. Your weapon becomes useless, right? And it's the same thing with everything else, right? So what's that, right? Or, the flat tax that they have in Europe, so on and so forth, right? Or a vat, like a vat that the Joker fell into and then became the crazy person that he was, etc., so on and so forth. He fell into a vat, right? So on and so forth. Now, here's the thing. As we move through life, we want to see uniqueness and creativity. This is why, yes, renditions of old greatness is great. Othello, William Shakespeare, so on and so forth. Romeo and Juliet, The Lion King, Little Mermaid, Snow White and the Seven Dudes, or whatever. Right? However, if there's no uniqueness and it just repeats and there's no change, well, then one, people might critique it negatively. Two, people might get bored and say it sucked. And if you don't have the individual that is needed to be themselves, as well as obtain their own character and keep it, right? Then it's going to be, well, a crappy performance or a crappy show or a crappy speech or a crappy paper, so on and so forth. There's a gentleman that I looked up to, well, I still do to this day, I think he's amazing, named Darren Brown. And when I got into mentalism, people were like, oh, he's gay, right? Don't care. Oh, this, right? Don't care. And, as I would see him in interviews, and it's very interesting because I connected with him on a lot of levels, but he was able to keep himself and still have showmanship while he was on stage. Now, granted, he said, that he was not, didn't have any special abilities, so he uses psychological effects, neurolinguistic programming, etc., and a variety of tactics in order to carry out his performance, similar to Chris Angel, right? Chris Angel went as far as putting hooks in his back and hanging in Vegas, so on and so forth, etc. But I also relate to Chris Angel because in one show that he did with Uri Geller, there was a gentleman pretending to speak to the dead, and he got, as we say, hot. He got a little hot, and he got in the dude's face. And I probably would have done the same thing. I've had my fair share of experiences with this, right? And, I commend him on that. That's something I would have done. That's a way of Marines dropping blouse. I don't give a F what you're doing. I know what you're doing. You're saying this, this, and this. I know it's an effect, but now you're tapping into something that you should not be dealing with or playing with, because you're going to play with fire and one day you're going to get burned, right? And I remember, I don't know if it's just the Carolinas or whatever, but I kept saying to people, I said, don't be an Icarus, right? And Icarus, as people know, flew too high or too close to the sun and his wings melted, so on and so forth. And then Dr. Jordan Peterson talks about the rest of everything else. And then if you actually read, you could see what happened. But then, of course, I hear on the radio, oh, Icarus this, Icarus that. Now, I didn't know if that was the media or the radio stations playing around or whatever, or maybe I offended somebody and they just thought it was funny because I was speaking about spirituality and things like that. The thing is, for these geniuses that wanted to play with this, right? Did they continue reading? Or did they just hear something and negate or neglect and make their own assumptions, go off their own opinion and just poke fun like little children do? Because you have to remember, we are all grown children looking for someone to guide us. If I remember correctly, that came from Johnny Depp, and I stated this, and I think in class. And when you're like that, whether you're in the military, you have your rank structure, you have someone to look up to, you also have someone below you, right, etc., so that you could bring them up. Tai Lopez talks about this in his Law of 33, right? I think his famous TED Talk, the Law of 33, right? You want a third of your friends to be above you, a third of your friends to be at your same level, and then a third to be below you. And that way you can have constant momentum. You have people that you can learn from that'll correct you or so on and so forth, etc., bring you up, help you level up as if we were in a video game or the Matrix. Then you have your crew that's at your level, that, you know, your friends, your girlfriends, your boyfriends, whatever the case may be, your homies, your crew, whatever the case. And then you have your the lower cats, right? The ones that they call Thundercats, as they say in the street now, right? Or the youngins, as they say, right? And you bring them up, you guide them. Yo, you probably shouldn't do that. I'm not going to say anything, but you probably shouldn't do that, etc. And, you know, you try to educate them along the way. It's kind of like what I said earlier. When somebody says brass tacks, what does that mean? Some people, if they are coming from a certain background, may take it personally as a threat, right? Thinking, oh, well, he said brass tacks, so that must mean this, that, and the third. Or it could mean you shut down the ammunition company, you tell everybody to stop selling ammunition, and nobody has bullets. And if you really want to go further, keep your guns. You're on a limited supply. Those will run out. And now your ass is screwed because law enforcement will have it. And they will take your ass to jail and eventually prison if you don't understand what I'm saying, right? So if you don't understand these things, then how are you going to understand everything else? Remember, you have to go through the world as though you live with the mind of a child, or as the mind of a child, meaning you are willing to learn and understand, right? And then create yourself. But if you're going to get calloused, right? If you're going to be defensive, if you're going to be upset, etc., so on and so forth, then you're going to paint yourself into a corner where people are not going to have to judge you, because you're then becoming an open book and exposing exactly who you are, right? So yeah, if you came from the street, so on and so forth, that's perfectly fine. But if you're going to change, then change, right? I had a buddy of mine, he was smoking weed, so on and so forth. I said, look, I'll quit with you. Let's go, so on and so forth. Now, anybody that knows me knows that I used to smoke weed back in the day. I smoked it maybe a couple months ago, whatever the case may be. You could even talk to the medical community, so on and so forth, since they like to, play games. But they could check my records, right? Used to. I'll be taking a test soon. I'm going to be clear, so on and so forth. And I even told this guy, I said, I'll do it with you, and then we'll start together, just to prove that I'll do it with you. If you remember previous stories of Father Ralph, when he said he was going to drop the veil in front of me, right? He was a priest at the Catholic school that I went to. And he got dressed up in regular clothes, and he met this guy at the bar that was on the verge of, suicide. I think his wife left him. All this other stuff was happening. She cheated on him. He felt worthless, all this other stuff. And, I think she cheated on him with a guy that had more money or education, whatever the case may be. And I was there, and I'm looking at him, and I was just quiet. I normally am quiet. I'm not like one of my uncles that'll always point out stuff. Oh, this one's going to screw this one over. Or did you see that? And blah, blah, blah. Shut up. I know already. Yes, I see it. Be quiet, etc. Right? I'm trying to understand what is going on. And so the guy orders a drink, and then Father Ralph is like, yeah, let me get an old fashioned. And I was like, that was the coolest shit I've ever seen. I was like, huh. He goes, certain people, we do what we have to in order to save. Others will do what they want to in order to get attention, right? And you have to remember that, right? Some people will cry out, right? And it depends. Are they looking for attention, or are they looking to be helped, or as they say, saved, right? Now, you don't have to be everyone's hero, because as someone once told me, you're not here to save everybody. You can't save everybody. I had to learn that hard lesson in the military with an accident that occurred. And when we got on scene, the gentleman that hit the 7-ton that fell on top of his head, he was still alive when we got there. Now, my buddy Resendez, he ended up going into shock. He's like, Mike, what do I do? Well, technically he said, Guerrero, what do I do? And I said, go take care of Simpson, so on and so forth. And I just stood there and I waited, and I could hear the moans and everything. And then I saw a bunch of Marines, I think it was like 7 or 8 of them, trying to lift this 7-ton. And as much as they tried, they couldn't. And you can't save everybody, right? And then of course, later on, the emergency units came, ambulance came, and this white hat, well, he wasn't a white hat in my sense. He was a white hat, I guess. He was wearing a white hard hat. paramedic, so on and so forth, comes out and he goes, oh, we got one casualty over or one death over there, throw a sheet over it. We got a couple people that are severe, etc., so on and so forth, etc. And I was like, how the hell did he just do that? I want to learn how to be like that proficient, that quick, to just understand, okay, that one's gone. We're not going to be able to save that one. All right. And then just keep moving, right? Some people will get stuck, right? And when you get stuck, you can't really move or help anyone else. And that's where I'm trying to get this student, right? I feel as though he's stuck, right? Because of his life experiences, right? And I'm going to touch back on Lance for a little bit because we just grew up as brothers, and I'm sure his older brother TJ still has this card somewhat. But when Lance used to hang out with me, Lance is white, I'm Hispanic, and I gave him a pass around some friends to say certain things that should not be said, right? Think Harry Potter, like don't say Voldemort, the name that should not be said. And we were hanging out with some friends, and he said the word or whatever, and I was just like, I put my hand up and just shook my head. He's with me, it's fine. Everybody knew what I was saying without saying it, right? Because my crew's a little bit different. And so when he said something, I was just like, my eyes got big. I was like, okay, let's see how he's using it. Let's see how this, that, and the third. Is he trying to be negative? Is he trying to be positive? Blah, 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 blah. And, it became okay. Then, of course, he started dating this female, beautiful girl named Sheena, African-American. And, he got his card and everything. And then, of course, it's like everything else. And, the joke in the branches, and I've seen this several times, it's like an Air Force guy and a Marine guy hang out, and the Marine goes, all right, I'm going to assign you a man card so you can hang out with us. And he goes and he writes up the thing, and he hands the Air Force dude his man card. And he goes, oh, thank you so much. Can we get a hug? And he goes, see, the moment I give it to you, now you just wasted it, right? So on and so forth. But it was kind of like that. Yes, it was sarcastic and funny, but you get the idea, right? So, looking at this student, I kind of look at him as a combination of both Tony, Lance, and another friend of mine. Tony used to say, I remember when I first met him, I was like, yo, do you play basketball? We're trying to play, would you like to play with us? I came from a different area. I did not grow up in the South. And he's like, nah, I don't play basketball. And then next thing you know, I see him shooting basketball at the basketball court. And me and my buddy Chris and Dion look at each other and we're like, yo, you play basketball? He goes, oh, well, what happened was, and I was like, stop bullshitting and just fucking come play with us. And so we all became best friends, so on and so forth, etc. And little by little, I got him to open up, right? Now, Tony's a country boy from Savannah, Georgia. Went to the Army, everything. I think he was a sniper, if I remember correctly. Stationed in Texas prior to, and now he has a great family. But I remember I took him to a festival. Now, me being me, I'm always dancing, so on and so forth. And he's like, I could see, he could see the excitement, the joy that everybody was getting dancing, whether it was salsa, hip hop, breakdancing, etc. And, I started to show him some stuff. And then my mother pulled him out into the crowd and was like, it's easy, I'll show you. And, he enjoyed it. And next thing you know, he's like, Mike, I got to dance with your mom, blah, blah, blah. And then I got to dance with so-and-so. And I was like, you had fun though, right? And he goes, yeah, I had a lot of fun. I said, okay, then. So are you scared now? It's like sticking your toe. And I remember this from The Mystery Method by Eric von Markovich, right? Who goes by the name Mystery. He goes, think of it like a pool, right? You see everybody in the pool having fun, so on and so forth, etc. And my student is the one that's dipping his toe into the water and is like, nah, it's too cold, so on and so forth. And I'm the guy that's going to come and tackle him and throw him into the deep end of the pool. And then once he's there and he gets past the panicking phase, what's it called? He then realizes that it's okay to be in the water with everybody else. It's okay. He's actually having fun, so on and so forth. It's okay to dance. Did you have fun? Did anybody that looks up to you say, I didn't know you could do that? What else can you do? Blah, blah, blah. It's like when I see my dad DJ and, he's into his whole thing, so on and so forth, because he used to DJ back in the day. And I could see his energy just like change, right? I guess I use the word energy because it's just the best, most relatable thing, but his personality, his persona comes out, right? And when he gets around his friends, it's like being himself or being young again, right? Because you have to remember, the only difference between being old and being young is a mindset. I have seen people well into their 50s or 60s that act like children, still know how to have fun, so on and so forth, maybe a little responsible every times, but they have their stuff together, but they know how to have fun. But I've also seen people that are in their 20s act as though they're extremely old, etc. Life's over. Oh my God, this, that, and the third, so on and so forth. So it's really a mindset, and I feel as though my student started off one way, wanting to fit in with the crowd, like Tony, so on and so forth, and then just needed that partner, that friend, that colleague, whatever the case may be, to be like, yo, come on, let's go. Or as Marines would like to say, stop being a bitch, let's do this. And so, it's one of those things that I'm trying to get through to him. But hopefully, while you guys have been watching this video, you can leave comments down below. I'm looking for what should I do to get across to him that, it's okay to jump into the pool with everybody else. Probably not say too much stuff because it might get you in trouble. However, like Lance, dropping an N-word in front of a group of people that you probably shouldn't. So, and then, not doing it correctly. Instead of, dropping it with the A, you drop it with the hard ER, if you know what I'm saying. And it's like, whoa, 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 whoa. Let's back up, slow your roll, etc. Blah, 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 blah. I know you're trying to speak to and fit in here, but if you want to hang out with the cool kids, say it like this, not like that, right? Or as the song goes, you could get with this or you could get with that. So on and so forth, right? So, you have to look at those things. And then, of course, if you're looking at, well, let's say art, right? Are you going to critique or criticize someone's artwork and then be their friend later when you find out that their artwork sold for hundreds of millions of dollars, right? Oh, yo, did you hear about this? I'm sure, who was it? Jackson Pollock, when he started his splatter paintings and everything, people were like, you're crazy. Same thing with Picasso. You're crazy. Or same thing with, whomever. You're crazy. This is never going to get out there. This is horrible. Look at Lindsay Sterling, for crying out loud. Lindsay Sterling, they told her when she was performing, I think it was on America's Got Talent, if I remember correctly, and they told her that it sounded like a barrel of rats screeching and screaming while she was on stage playing. Look at where she's at now. Because not only did she overcome and adapt, but she did not stick to a certain mold. She was not scared of the cancellation because of the powers that be. She went out and carved her own path. And when I went to see her live, she literally had tombstones on the stage with these people's names on them. I think Pierce Morgan was one of them, right? So on and so forth. And I went with a friend of mine, and it was a phenomenal show. I think Evanescence was playing, they played, and I forgot, I think it was just those two. But it was amazing, right? Same thing with Michael Flatley, right? If you ever heard of Riverdance, so on and so forth, people thought he was crazy, so on and so forth. He's now one of, if not one of the highest paid dancers in the world, right? Michael Flatley, he created Riverdance, Broadway show, by the way. Then you have Dangerous Games that he came out with and a couple other things. But look at what going outside of your comfort zone, right? Yes, it's going to be hard. Yes, you're going to get pushback. But if you want to be great, what do you expect? You want muscles? Go to the gym, lift heavy weights. If not, just go through the motions, doing the bare minimum or the average that you do every single time. Yeah, you may maintain your health, but you're not going to get stronger, faster, etc. And you're definitely not going to have abs. So when you scream on stage like Tony Robbins, so on and so forth, and you show your abs through your shirt, who are you doing that for? You're not going to get those. I can tell you that if you don't, so on and so forth. How are you going to develop more connections with more people if you do not know how to communicate, or if you're holding back, right? Because you're scared. And if somebody can see that, and I remember a friend of mine, Sid, this is another friend of mine, we were in the Marines together. I remember we went to a performance. I used to dance on a UNC Charlotte. We were break dancers within this hip hop crew, and Donald Colson, who's now a very well respected dancer out of Atlanta, him and Sid came over to me and goes, Mike, no one knows you made a mistake unless you show them that you made a mistake when you're dancing, right? And I was like, yeah, got it. But I was doing so much at the time that, yeah, I froze and I looked over, and that quickly gave away that I made a mistake, right? Or said something, whatever the case may be, right? And that's how I feel like my student is, what's happening to him, right? I see him going out into the world and doing stuff and trying it, And then the moment something happens, he like freezes and looks around. Is it okay? Is blah blah blah? Did I say that? I'm gonna keep rolling. Blah blah blah. So on and so, and that's perfectly fine. But no one knows what you're saying, or should I say, how you're saying it, unless you let them or you tell them, right? Unless somehow, right, some which way, shape, or form, right, they all share the same mind, or you practice in front of a group of people and said, okay, at these points I want you to laugh, right? Think of it like a sitcom. I'm going to say this joke and then I want you to hit the applause button and then the crowd's going to applaud. This is how they used to do TV shows back in the day, right? And so they would have the set, so on and so forth. The cast would be performing and then this little light would come on and it would say applause or cheer or whatever the case. And then eventually there was a sound box that did the same thing, you know? Now you can do that or be original. Add in what you learned. Hell, put some of it in there, right? But be yourself. And don't be scared to also inspire others to be themselves. Maybe some people are scared to dance. Maybe some people are scared to sing. Maybe some people are scared to talk on stage. Maybe some people are scared to be managers. Maybe some people are scared to start a business. Inspire them. That's your freaking job as an adult or human being, because that's how you develop a strong circle around you, right? Yes, you can say the best one-liner in the world that somebody else may say, so on and so forth. But if the other person, like the magic trick that I showed earlier to someone else, they're going out to hustle people out of money, whereas the other person was doing it to entertain, don't have a problem with it, but understand who you are, the company you keep, and you become like the 5 people you hang around. I have no problem hanging around both sides of the fence. I normally, stay in the middle, jump back and forth every once in a while, because, sometimes I like to have fun. But, that's what Marines do. Anyways, once a Marine, always a Marine. So I just wanted to share this with you for those of you who have been watching class. And, granted, I don't have that many students. I think it's like 150 or I'm tapping 200, whatever, subscribers. And now those people watch the stuff and, they get private links and all this other stuff. However, if you are watching it, or if you are applying it, right? Don't be scared to be yourself. Don't be scared to try new things. Don't be scared to go to the museum and appreciate art or science or whatever the case may be, right? I'm in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I'm wondering, do these kids know why they're going to college? Why are they majoring in something, right? Because I would love to ask some doctors, if the salary wasn't there, would they still be a doctor? Right? Or did they become a doctor because of the salary, right? Or did they go into computer science because of the salary, right? Because of how much they could make, instead of doing what they wanted to do, what they were passionate about, that they could have made earth-shattering amounts of money with. You have to remember, there's 7 to 8 billion people on the planet. You need 1% to become a multimillionaire. 7 billion people. 1% of 7 billion people times, let's say, $20 or $25, so on and so forth, or whatever you're going to charge, turns you into a millionaire, making more than $1 million. Think about that. And if you think it's hard, it'll be hard. If you think it's going to be easy, it'll be easy. But how will it be easy? You have to first learn how to enjoy it. Not only enjoy it, but enjoy yourself. Being yourself, not always having to put on different shirts and hats, so on and so forth. Yeah, it's great to change your clothes and look presentable, but if that's not who you are when you get dressed, then why dress that way? To impress others? Granted, I used to say this, and I still say this to this day. I said it to a couple buddies of mine in the military. I said, Daddy could wear the pants in the relationship as long as mommy picks them out, because mommy's checking daddy out and she wants daddy to look good. So remember that. All right. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this. Take care. Love you guys. And hopefully either later today or tomorrow, I should be wrapping up with the next lesson of class. So I'll be putting that out. Till next time, my friends. Take care. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.